What's up, guys? It's Ray J back with another video, and in this one, I want to break down what's happening with Tesla, SPY, Nvda, the QQQ, and a couple of other tickers. I'm going to break down what's happening with the market moving forward, as we have big catalysts coming out for tomorrow, not to mention new developments on the charts. But just note that I am not a financial planner, so take nothing I say as financial advice. And also, if you guys can, please check out the Moomoo link. If you deposit $100, you're guaranteed 5 free stocks. If you deposit $1,000, you're guaranteed 15 in total, not to mention 8.1% APY on uninvested cash. This offer ends in just a couple of weeks. So, anyways, let's talk about what's happening with the markets. Looking at Tesla, we got a very, very nice day today. We started off all the way down here in this 208 area. We saw Tesla continue to push and push and push all the way up to the 220 range. So, in my video yesterday, I was mentioning that there's going to be a big move coming depending on the JOLTS job numbers. And that's what helped Tesla hold up very nicely. We also mentioned the possibility of an inverse head and shoulders that could have been forming if Tesla had held some key support. And so far, that ended up being the case. And the question is, will Tesla get a big rejection here, or will we end up bouncing? I'll be talking more about that in just a couple of minutes. I first want to note that there's a lot of data coming out tomorrow that will affect the markets and Tesla. Tomorrow is going to be Thursday, September 5th, 2024. 1 hour before the market opens, we have initial jobless claims coming out with the continuing jobless claims. It's going to be very important to look for some volatility then at 8:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Then at 9:45 a.m., we have the S&P Global Composite PMI and Services PMI reports coming out. That's very important as well, so watch and see how this ends up going. Finally, at 10 o'clock a.m. Eastern Standard Time, we have the ISM Services Business Activity, Employment, New Orders, and Prices reports also coming out. That's going to cause some high volatility, so get ready for all of that. But this is going to be the main piece of data. The biggest moves are going to be coming because of this, so get ready for all of that. Now, one thing worth mentioning is that Services New Orders is important for inflationary data and also future projections of this sector. So forward-looking data tends to be more important, so look for the most volatility then. So once again, for tomorrow, wait 30 minutes after market open. That's the main time we have the biggest pieces of data coming out. This is going to be the ISM services report, so watch for high volatility then. And when I talk about high volatility, you guys can see how this really affects us. If you look at Tesla, for instance, the data did affect the way Tesla was pumping, especially as we got this nice push. So that's just how important this data tends to be. Then we have some bill auctions. Everything else is quite minor, but the main time is 10 a.m. Now, when the JOLTS job report came out, the data was not too good. The job report was showing the lowest amount of job openings since January of 2021, and we got job quits above expectations. So that's telling us that what's happening in the economy is the unemployment rate is starting to go up, and we're seeing more contraction. Jerome Powell in the Fed mentioned that if there is more contraction in unemployment, the Fed's going to be forced to take action, at least be a part of it, and they're going to be more incentivized to cut. So what happened was this number right here started going down a little bit, and then this one started going up a little bit because now the market thinks there's a 55% chance we get a 25 basis point cut and a 45% chance we get a 50 basis point cut. That's why the market saw a little bit of a pump today. The market's interpretation of the data was that, with tighter economic reports for the labor markets, the Fed is more incentivized to cut. That's what the way the market kind of interpreted all the data. So one thing worth mentioning is that, and you guys have to remember this, sometimes you could get good data and the market could dump. Sometimes you get bad data, the market pumps. It has to do with interpretation and the fact that the market's data is just noise. All of this is noise that comes out at specific times, and they use this noise as an excuse to move things based off their algorithms. That's how the market moves, guys. It's not just because all good data means the market pumps, all bad data means the market dumps. Sometimes it could be mixed, so you want to be watching for those reports. You want to be watching the moves after the data releases. For earnings, we had Dick's Sporting Goods announced their earnings. They did relatively well, beating expectations. For tomorrow, we have Neo before the market opens. Then on Friday, we have Big Lots. Right now, the market's neutral. We were talking about how this is going to be dipping to neutral. We'll be watching to see what kind of reaction we get if we get back into the greed or not. But eventually, I do think that there's going to be more fear building up later on. Right now, fear is making up the majority of sentiments. And then also, don't forget that the puts and call option ratios at fear, as we're starting to see a lot more sellers stepping in. We're starting to see a lot more shorts piling into the markets. And we'll see how this ends up affecting things. Volatility is right now neutral, so we'll see what that leads to. The VIX is still holding up nicely. As far as Tesla goes, Tesla had some advantages because we saw a lot of positive headlines coming out about their new six-seat Model Y. The Chinese sales being pretty good, and some good things came out, such as the jobs report, which helps Tesla. Because remember, Tesla is very sensitive to interest rates, so all those different factors helped Tesla, which is why we outperformed the market. When it comes to other news, we had 80 million in volume, so volume is going up just a little bit. And then Cantor Fitzgerald gave us a neutral rating, but William Blair maintains their outperform rating for Tesla. The price price ratio is going up because Tesla is building some strength, and we tend to see more volatility on Thursdays. About 47% of the time, we're in the green, and we tend to see more green around not just green, but more volatility around the opening hour of the day and also at 1 p.m. So watch Tesla during those hours. With that being said, that's it for my analysis on data and news. Let's now just focus on what the charts are suggesting. So I just want to mention that Tesla's looking pretty good right now. We have a possible inverse head and shoulders like structure that is developing. That's a good sign for us, at least thus far. We have kind of like a left shoulder here. We have like a head and maybe a right shoulder that could be forming. And generally, that could lead us to kind of dipping, then eventually trying to push to fill this imbalance. But for confirmation that, you want to be watching your levels. So the daily chart looks pretty good as well. We still have this imbalance to fill up here. And the daily looks a little bit more bullish as volume is starting to build back up for Tesla. And we're starting to see some more buyers stepping in. The weekly on Tesla is looking pretty good. We're forming a nice looking candlestick thus far. We'll see if we can hold this structure, but we're looking pretty good. So, in my personal opinion, I think that what's going to likely happen is when you hit this resistance, Tesla has had a very, very tough time in the 220 area. Notice that we hit 221. We got a rejection here. Well, it started off right here. We got a rejection, came back up, got a rejection, came here, got a rejection, came here. And I'm trying to say that this is going to be a tough resistance. So I wouldn't be surprised if we see this dip a little bit. Then we'll be watching to see if we get a rebound if we try to fill the imbalance after that. So watch support at 217 and then 215. And if that fills us, we're going back down to 212 towards our EMAs. Watch resistance around 220. If we break that, we're looking for 222, which is the high of the day, which is what I called out in my morning video. Not to mention 225. Those are going to be your very important levels for Tesla. What do I think is going to happen? I think we're going to dip a little bit right over here. We could be retesting this 214 to 217 area down here. And then we'll be watching to see if Tesla makes a higher low and if we try to get a bounce and start pushing back up for 225. We're going to be watching to see if we can get a bounce right over there. That's going to be the most important test that's coming out for tomorrow. So tomorrow, look and see if Tesla retest this area. Do we hold support? If we don't hold the support, we could collapse back down to 212 or lower. But if we hold support, we'll be looking for a rebound like this to complete the inverse head and shoulders. And we could be looking for a rally back up to 225. I personally favor this a little bit more, looking at how well we hold up and how bullish the daily is looking, especially after forming a big bar like this. Generally, that does lead to more bullish momentum. But just for confirmation, we'll see if Tesla gets a dip and a bounce, and we break past resistance to push up for that 222 and 225 area. Now, let me just call out, there's a lot of data coming out, especially at 10 o'clock a.m. Eastern Standard Time tomorrow. So we'll see if that causes a pump or dump in the markets. So I'll be watching that very, very patiently. But for now, Tesla could dip a little bit before it tries to continue to go higher. I'll be watching that very, very carefully. For others out there, we have SPY. SPY is dipping right now. It's on a bit of a downtrend. But it's very interesting because we're not officially losing our key supports. We're barely holding this 550 area. And then on the daily chart, we have support around 548. That's going to be our 50 EMA. So we'll look at 550 as our support. If we hold this, we're looking at 552 as resistance, followed by 553. That's our 20 EMA. If we lose 550, look at 548. If that fills us, we're looking for 546. And eventually this gap fill all the way down towards 543. Those are your levels to watch for on SPY. Now, what I think is going to happen, here's my view, guys. I think SPY will come down to fill these gaps eventually. I think by October, we'll be filling this 543 gap and also the gap down here around 533. So I do expect us to dip another 20 points to the downside. However, that does not mean we have to dip every single day of the month. It doesn't necessarily guarantee that. So for example, when SPY was at its all-time high back in July, at least for the time, we were at 565. We came down to 547. We came back up, came down, back up, came down, then back up. So it's like we don't just drop in a straight line. We dip a bit, then we rebound a little bit, then we dip lower. It tends to move in cycles like that. And I think that's what's going to be happening for now. So for tomorrow, the best thing to do is watch your tight levels. We're range bound between 550 and 553 right now. I presume we're going to maintain this structure. And it is, if we do get a rebound, we could get closer to 555 again. It is possible we get one more rebound before we continue lower to come down to fill this gap around 543. So I think that's what's going to likely happen. We will come down to fill the gap, but we might just consolidate or even rebound a bit first before we continue lower. For tomorrow, when the data comes out, we'll be looking for a test of 553. I think we might be retesting this, and we'll see if we get a big rejection or not. But remember my view, guys. I think for the medium term going into October, we're bearish. I think there's going to be more downside coming. For the short term, for tomorrow specifically, we'll see if we get a temporary rebound with the ISM data. We'll have to just see what the reaction is, but it's very possible we try to retest the high of the day for today before we continue lower later on. For ES, we have something very similar going on. We have support at 55.13. If that fails us, we'll be dipping all the way down to 54.80. And we have resistance at 55.60. If we break that, we're looking for 55.80. So I think that there's a good chance we rebound but then continue lower. I think we will ultimately come down to fill these imbalances, especially down towards like the 5300s. Yes, I think ES is going to dump soon, but before that happens, we're just range bound for now. So we just have to see which way we break. What do I mean by range bound? We hit the green EMA today. We rejected. We hit the yellow one. We rebounded. So we have our 20 and 50 EMAs as our support and resistance levels on the daily. So I think we're just going to remain stuck for now, and then we'll see which way we go. But for now, I think we're just kind of stuck in the middle. So just watch the structure for now. We're going to likely just be range bound for ES. Then we'll see maybe a break later on. It may take a couple of days to get it, if not a week or so. So give it some time. For Nvidia, I think the same thing. I think Nvidia will eventually fall to the 100 area, if not lower. But for the short term, we're range bound. We're range bound just like that of SPY. We have resistance to watch for around this 108 area and also at 110. Then we have support to watch for 104 and the 100 area. If we lose 104, we're bearish. If we break 110, we could turn bullish. I think we're going to try to retest 110. If we break that, we could go a little higher, but then there could be a rejection coming to move back down later on. That's what I favor, at least for the time being. A little bit of a rebound, then continuation lower. That's what I find to be the most likely possibility. For Bitcoin, we have resistance at 58,800, and we have support at 58,000, 57,000. I think it's possible we try to rebound a bit, then continue lower. So watch to see what the move ends up being. That's going to be very key for how things end up developing. But I think there might be a little bit of a pop coming before we try to reject and start dipping. So look for a little bit more upside on Bitcoin before we continue to dip. For like I said about Tesla, same thing. Tesla could dip a little bit and then continue higher. There's still more upside potential. Just want to clarify that, especially going into tomorrow. For NQ, I think the same thing that I think of the broader markets. There's more downside potential for the medium term, especially as we approach the mid 18,000s. But before that happens, we could see a little rebound first. We could try to attempt to hit the low 19,000s before we start dipping back down lower. So I'll be watching for that very carefully. With the QQQ, I think that when you look at the daily, we have the gap to fill all the way down to about the 450 area. So that's actually specifically at 451-ish. We have that gap to fill. I think that there's downside potential, especially as we have that big red bar. If we lose 458, we could be dipping all the way down to 451, and we have resistance around this 462 area, not to mention 465. I think there's a good chance we continue to dip, and I think that this may continue to dip like that if we end up losing 458. So we might rebound a little bit on the QQQ and consolidate, but then later on down the line, I do see us dipping to 458 and eventually 453. So I think we will be seeing more downside, but we'll see tomorrow if there's some consolidation, maybe even a little bit of a pop, depending on the data. But there's still going to likely be a move to the downside coming. For Apple, we're barely holding 218. If we hold 218, we could try to rebound off of this just a little bit towards 222, then eventually 223.8. But then we could reject between 222 and 223.8 to continue lower. If we lose 218, we're looking for a bigger dip, but I don't see us doing that yet. I presume we're going to rebound a little bit before we continue lower, so watch for that on Apple, at least moving forward. With that being said, guys, I'm going to go on a speed run for the rest of these. For Palantir, we're looking at support at this 30.5 area and resistance at 30.8, not to mention 31. We might try to rebound a bit towards 31 before we continue lower, so watch for that. This could be forming kind of like an inverse cup and handle. So look for a little bit of a push towards the 31 area before we try to reject and start dipping. I find that's to be very, very probable. For Supermicro, we're on a bit of a dip right now. We're on a bit of a downtrend as we're making lower highs and lower lows. We have our key support to be watching for at 420, not to mention 400, and resistance at 430 and 450. I think what's going to most likely happen is we retest 430, could go a little bit higher before we continue lower to 400. So watch for that very carefully. For Rivian has some balance down here. We could rebound a bit for that 13.63 area before we continue lower. But I think that this is ultimately bearish. If you look at the chart, we're making lower highs and lower lows. I think there's more downside eventually coming to these imbalances, taking us down to the 12s. So we could rebound to about 13.63, then eventually start dipping to the 12s. That's very probable in my personal opinion. For SoFi, we have a head and shoulders like structure. Also, don't forget that we were holding this yellow trend line for quite some time, and then as of recent, we retested the trend line only to reject. So it's a sign of weakness. So if we were to hypothetically break past 7.8, we could turn back up. And if we fail to do so, we're looking for support at 7.18. I presume that we're rejecting here, but we could be looking for a rejection move back down to 7.18. And I think that we might kind of pop and drop down to our 200 EMA all over again. For the IWM, we're looking a little bit more bearish as we got this rejection or break below our key trend line. Now we're barely holding 212. If we lose 212, we're going down to 208. And if we hold this, we could be pushing up for 215. I think there's a good chance that we may be dipping down for 215. If 215 breaks, if 212 breaks, excuse me, we'll be looking for 208. So I think that's this might consolidate in this range for now, but I do see us eventually dipping down to fill our gap around 208. So watch to see if that ends up being the case. For AMD, we're starting to downtrend right over here. I wouldn't be surprised if we either attempt to retest, 142, 143 to 146 before we start dipping, or if we just reject here and start dipping. But I do see a downtrend coming. I think there's a good chance that continues. For ARM, we have a double top leg structure developing. We have 125 as resistance, and then we have support at 120. If 120 fails, this will be dipping much lower. So with this structure, with the double top, I think there's a good chance we dip lower. We could rebound for 124 and then continue to fall all the way down to 117. So I favor that a little bit more in my opinion. For Coinbase is looking a little bit more bearish to me as we're making lower highs and lower lows. I think that we could try to retest our resistance around this 168 area, but then we may continue to dip lower towards 155 and 150. So look for a little rebound before we continue lower. I still favor more downside for coin. For Amzn, notice that we pumped and rejected, pumped and rejected. Look at resistance at 175. If we don't reclaim that, we're going to likely continue to fall all the way down towards 169. We could retest this resistance tomorrow towards 175 before we continue lower, but I do find that to be more favorable. For Meta, we're kind of rejecting off every single one of these pops. Look at resistance around 516 to 518. Then we have support at 506. We could push for this resistance to start dipping lower, and I find that to be a little bit more probable. For Microsoft is also dipping right here, making lower highs and lower lows. I wouldn't be surprised if we try to retest this 410 range and then possibly dip down lower. I think that there's more downside coming because every time we pop, we reject it. I think this looks bearish, and we're going to ultimately be coming down towards the lower 400s. So look for a rebound and continuation lower as the most likely possibilities. For Google's looking more bearish to me. We're barely holding support 156. We might be testing that tomorrow. If that fails us, we could be dipping to the lower 150s. For a few more, we have essentially DJT on a bit of a downtrend. We could be pushing slowly down towards the 15 area. So I find that that's to be a little bit more favorable. For the VIX, we are once again forming a double bottom, trying to break out. There's a good chance this may continue to push as the market remains bearish. We'll see if we dip first. If the market tries to rebound while this dips before this tries to bounce, and the market, drops as a result. But I think that there's more upside coming to the VIX eventually, and there's more downside for the markets in October. For the 10-year Treasury yield, I think that this dipped because of the fact that the jobs report was more weak, which incentivized the Fed to be more a little bit more dovish. So that's why we saw this end up dipping. That's part of why we saw that. And finally, for the dollar index, I just want to say that this still could be forming an inverse head and shoulders, which is what I was talking about yesterday, how the market could rebound first before anything else. So we'll see if we come down to the support right here around this 101 area. If we get a bounce like that, this could be an inverse head and shoulders. We do love to bounce off the 100s off the dollar. So that could be because the market's going to rebound a little bit more as this dips. And then eventually, if this does get a big bounce next week, that could be signifying that the market has more downside coming. So my view of the market is there's more downside coming ultimately. For the short term, there might be some consolidation, maybe even a bounce depending on the data. For Tesla, for the short term, we have a bullish setup that's developing. Nice volume is coming in. So I'm favoring that this may attempt to bounce, at least just temporarily. So that being said, guys, always remember one thing. The market is very difficult to predict sometimes. We can't always predict every move. So even in the cases that I am wrong, which does happen because I'm not really a fortune teller, I don't always know what's going to happen. You want to be prepared by looking at supply and demand, watch your levels, and you want to be very, very open-minded, very adaptive in a market that's just like this. So it's a very tricky market. Make sure you watch the levels carefully. Tesla has a nice inverse head and shoulders forming and has a lot of potential for that to pan out. So we'll see how well it ends up doing. With that being said, I hope you guys have a great day, night, or evening, wherever you guys are around the world. I just wish the best for everyone. I just want to say I really appreciate you guys so much for your attention through all these days. The market is just very tricky sometimes, and it can be very painful, but just know that, there's always something bright out there. And you have to remember that you shouldn't let overconfidence get the best of you. I've heard a lot of people in the comments talking about this, how they're so confident the market's going to make a move that they double down on a position, they end up taking losses. When you start investing too much, or if you trade too much and you don't really manage risks, when doing so, it could really have a big effect on your portfolio. So I just want to remind you guys about that. It's very important during times like these. Anyways, have a great night, guys. I'll see you guys tomorrow. I'll be talking about initial jobless claims and everything else that's coming out for the market's data. Until then, take care and peace out.